before I introduce them, two quick announcements. So in order to save time, the film this evening cut out one of the chapters which dealt with the Mormons, persecution of the Mormons. That was primarily because it was the least Philadelphia part of the story. So in other showings, other chapters get cut. The second thing is this show is going to air locally on WHYY on December 22nd from 3 until 5 p.m. And it's also going to be available on the Passport app. So if you would like to see it again, there you go. Okay, let me introduce, starting from here and moving to the end. So first, Reverend Carolyn Clarene Cavaness, yes, who is the pastor of the Bethel AME Church of Ardmore, the first female pastor in the 128 years of their existence, with degrees from Barnard, Union Theological Seminary, very distinguished. Welcome. Then next to her is Dr. Josh Perelman, who is the principal of the Studio Perelman, senior advisor for content and strategic projects at the Weitzman National Museum of American Jewish History. He has 2 doctorates from NYU, one in American history, the other Jewish studies, hence entitling him to be Dr. Next to him, the Reverend Philip Bochanski, who is Vicar General and Moderator of the Curia for the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, author of 6 books on ecclesiastical history and other religious themes, who in 2019 was awarded by Pope Francis the Cross per Ecclesia et Pontifice for services to the Church. And finally, as you've all figured out by now, our narrator, Richard Brookhiser, is a columnist, senior editor at the National Review, known for not only television shows, but also for numerous works of biography. He wrote a biography of George Washington, one of Alexander Hamilton, and the one that I've used the most, his biography of Gouverneur Morris. Okay, so that is the panel. And I thought I might start by asking the panelists to react to the film, to the things that struck them as most important, or things that were not included in the film, questions that it opens. There's obviously an enormous amount to discuss. Let me on that go first with my own reaction. So you can think of the film sort of in 2 ways. So you can think of the history going back to the 17th century, and it raises the question that you can phrase as follows: how does one go from a world of Peter Stuyvesant's to a world of George Washington's? There's a historical development there. Washington would not have fit in very well in the early Dutch settlement. Stuyvesant would not have fit in well in 18th century America. So what's the mechanism that takes you from one social situation to the other? That's question number 1, and it's a very messy, complicated historical process, as the film made clear. Second question applies more to today, because it's clear that these problems are not all behind us. You can find politicians, religious leaders saying extremely bigoted things about people of other faiths, being quite as intolerant in their own way as Peter Stuyvesant. So the answer to that historical question actually has present-day relevance. By the way, not just in the United States. So problems of religious warfare, religious intolerance, lack of religious pluralism, they are global. Okay, so with that, I will stop. Those are my observations. Those are the things that most struck me from the film, but I'm much more interested to hear what the panelists have got to say. So, Carolyn, do you want to?
So firstly, I say wow because I did not know that the sermon I preached at Mother Bethel was being filmed. And so I have to get after my colleague, Reverend Dr. Mark Tyler, and I'm going to text him. But what strikes so striking is certainly this tension of other and belonging, and how there is such a strife on someone's difference. However, which was very striking at the end, where it says, even in spite of that, America still provides protection much more than our contemporaries. And so that really stood out. I also would say of how the work of my own vine and fig tree, that in the face of strife and tension and violence, that communities that are both mainline and or what we call, I call practices and expressions on the margin, are still able to fight on, are still able to persevere, are still expressions of civil disobedience and expressions of resistance in the face of. So that's what stood out to me quite a bit.
Well, knowing that that was you preaching, I'm now going to make a trip to Ardmore. You may hear some consistency here, but there are three things that I was thinking about that stood out to me. And first of all, I want to congratulate Richard and your partners and everybody who made the film. It's an important film, and I think it'll be an important film, especially if we can allow younger people to see it. And I hope that that will happen. But there are three examples that I was thinking of. Well, two examples and just one statement. One is, so the famous letter from George Washington to the Hebrew, it says on the top, the Hebrew congregation of Newport, Rhode Island, is featured in the movie. So this is a letter that makes the statement that the new government will give to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance. On one hand, and if you read the whole letter, it's about 730 some words, it is one of the most gorgeous statements about a vision for a country that respects religious individuality, that respects religious communities, and embraces the diversity that the nation was then and has become today. On the other hand, and we teach about this all the time at the museum that I work at, George Washington owns over 300 slaves, and at the same time as he's preaching freedom and liberty, he is also taking away freedom and liberty. And therein lies, I think, one of the kind of central tensions about this concept of religious liberty, religious freedom, whatever we want to call it, and informs, I hope, as we continue, and this is my second point, I love the phrase free exercise, because exercise, number one, can imply doing something, but as many of you in this room might know, exercise requires effort. Like getting to that gym, like even every other day, requires effort, thought, and intentionality. And so what I love about that phrase, free exercise, building on my next point is that, or my previous point, is that we have to continue to do the work, right? It is our responsibility as citizens of this country, as visitors to this country, as residents in this country, to do the ongoing work that was set out for us in 1776. And then the third point I'll say, and then I will say maybe no more, is does anybody know, so everybody knows, right, March on Washington, the I Have a Dream speech. Does anybody know who spoke before Washington? He was in some of the pictures. So the person, I mean, it's not Washington, sorry, Martin Luther King, sorry. Closer, no, it was Rabbi Joachim Prince, who had formerly been the chief rabbi of in Germany. And he had to follow Mahalia Jackson, and that is a hard act to follow. But one thing he talks about in his speech, he says, the most urgent problem in that moment is not bigotry. The most urgent, the most shameful, the most disgraceful, the most tragic problem, he says, is silence. And that ties back again to the issue of free exercise. And I always think about, like, when I think about what is my role in the world, what is my role in an educational institution, it is to continue to do that exercise and continue the work set forth for us, whether in 1776, the March on Washington, or events of today.
The story that was told in the film about the nativist riots is very familiar, I think, to most Catholics here in Philadelphia. Actually, my family's roots are at St. Philip Neri Parish, the parish where it was attacked a couple months later. There's a couple of details about the story, the first couple days of those riots, that I think can point us towards things that are still ongoing in terms of the challenge for respect for religion. One is that the anti-Catholic aspect of the riots was a definite anti-Irish aspect too. One of the details that bears that out is that the riot went from St. Michael's in Kensington to Old St. Augustine's at 4th and Vine, both Irish churches, but passed right by St. Peter's at 5th and Gerrard, which is a predominantly German congregation, right? And so I think it's a reminder of how easy it is to kind of blur the lines between religion and ethnicity, right? I mean, so many waves of immigrants, the names change, but the treatment remains the same. And we think of kind of the lumping every immigrant from the Middle East and Southwest Asia into kind of real stereotypical attitudes towards Islam, without any kind of distinction in terms of what do people actually believe and say they believe, and how do they practice their faith. Another detail that bears that out from that story is what kind of sparked the riots was they mentioned it in the film, the matter of using Protestant Bibles in public schools. One of the reasons for that was their footnotes in certain parts of the version of the Bible that they were using that were definitely anti-Catholic, anti-Pope, anti-Vatican. And where that started was a Catholic member of the school board in Philadelphia, who was all about public schools, had mentioned this at a school board meeting and said, would it be possible for Catholic children in the public school to use a version of the Bible prepared by the Catholic Church that doesn't include these footnotes in it, so that they're not scandalized and have questions about what do their classmates, what do their teachers think of them. This was reported in newspapers as Catholic wants to ban the Bible from school. Right, and then as it went on, Catholics want to destroy the public school system. Right, and so the way that it's so easy for us to not just criticize an action, but to impute motives to people, and then that just becomes something that runs away with the whole conversation. Pope John Paul II, writing about dialogue, says dialogue depends on two things. And he was thinking both ecumenical, like within Christian denominations, and interreligious dialogue. Of course, it means that we take the other person, to really mean what they say, and we respond to that, not to our idea of it. It also means that the person themselves actually says what they mean, right? And that we kind of put the differences on the table and hash them out and see where we can come to some common ground. So if we're going to understand and protect each other's free exercise, we also have to understand each other's motives and beliefs, and let them be what they are, and not decide ahead of time, I know what you're thinking, I know what you're after, I know what you're doing, because that just it takes dialogue out of the equation, and then we treat each other very badly.
You've heard a lot of me, so I just want to say that I think my favorite episode in the film, it may not be my favorite part of how the film was realized, but it really is the Flushing Remonstrance. And the reason for that is these weren't wise rulers. This wasn't James Madison or George Washington or the Supreme Court laying down wise principles. And it wasn't people sticking up for their own. You know, it wasn't Catholics or Mormons or blacks or Jews defending themselves. These were people defending other people. They were saying, you can't do that to them. And finally, their reason, it wasn't enlightenment or a philosophical principle. They said, our Savior saith, this is the law and the prophets. This was a religious reason for defending the religious liberty of other people. And I think the best line in the film was by Akhil Amar, the professor from Yale Law School, who said, if religious liberty doesn't live in the hearts and minds of America, it's not going to live if it's not in our hearts and minds. And it seems to me the Flushing remonstrators had the best, firmest way of expressing and advancing that. And I choke up every time I think of the 6 guys who did not sign their names because they couldn't. They made their marks, but they laid down a marker.
Good. Thank you. So shall we open it up to questions and answers? Yes.
Hi, thank you for the film. It's election season, and we could still see Bibles on the, when you go to vote. I don't know if I fully understand why that's still allowed if we have separation of church and state. Can someone explain that to me? That's my first question. And my second question, if I'm allowed to ask, is I'm not fully well versed in, is the Anglican Church led by the Crown in the UK? And is that why there was a separation between the Anglican Church and the Baptist? Is that some politics? Do I fully understand that? If someone can help me understand those 2 questions, that would be great for me. Thank you.
Right. The Anglican Church became the Episcopalian Church in the United States after the Revolution, and they had to go through some efforts to get a bishop for this country, and it was a little complicated. Wouldn't you say that the leader of the Anglican Communion, to the extent they have one, is the Archbishop of Canterbury, probably?
No, it's the Crown.
The Crown.
So
Well,
that's
No,
political.
so in England, there is an established religion. King Charles is the head of the Anglican Church. It's been that way for several hundred years.
I have an anecdote about that. It was when Archbishop Runcie was the Archbishop of Canterbury, and he was at his first reception with Queen Elizabeth, who has passed away since. And according to protocol, the Queen is served, but then the second person to be served before the Prince of Wales is the Archbishop of Canterbury. He has precedence. So a servant asked him what he wanted to drink, and he asked for a scotch. And then he wasn't drinking it, and the Queen said, please drink. And he said, not before you, ma'am. And she said, oh, heavens no, not in Lent. He was being instructed, I guess, by the head of the church in his duties.
Now, on the other question, sort of the separation of church and state and the Bible, there's a general abstract tension between the 2 parts of the First Amendment dealing with religion. So on the one hand, you've got no establishment of religion. On the other hand, you have free exercise. And those 2 often can come into conflict. Okay, so for example, suppose that you have a soldier who is posted to some distant military place, and he says, I need a Catholic priest to hear my confession. if the US military says, right, we will fly out a priest, is that establishing a religion or is it helping with free exercise? And that sort of problem comes up in the law just all the time. So with voting, and I don't know exactly what the reference was to Bibles, if a private citizen has a Bible they carry with them under their arm coming into the voting booth, that's free exercise, that's unproblematic. If the state is saying, we've got a Bible here, you need to pay your respects to the Bible before you go into the voting booth, that's an Establishment Clause problem.
But I'm sorry, just clarification. But you will see when you check in to vote, sometimes there's a Bible on the table.
I think what you might be thinking, yeah, there's usually a big book for you to sign the way that you signed when you signed up to vote, so they can check your signature. I don't think it's a Bible on the table. But I mean, what you're talking about actually brings up a kind of a bigger point. One of the parishes where I was assigned was a polling place, right? And so we didn't have school on election day, and people would come in to vote, and we weren't required to cover the statues in the school or the religious art, and so there's that way in which there's that respect from the state for our religious, not just our belief, but our religious practice. Like in Catholic faith, there's a lot of iconography where it might not be in other denominations. I think another part of the question is, and I'm sure the Catholic Church is not the only one, but we serve everyone who comes, right? Our Catholic Human Services, I think, serves 7 million meals a year. And serves 600,000 individuals in the course of the year. And most of them, I think, many of them, maybe most of them, are not Catholic. And when we talk about, where are we allowed to practice our faith, freedom of worship means how you pray. And there have been times when the government would say, well, you can have a religious exemption within the walls of your church, or as long as you're teaching people of your own faith, or just working with co-religionists. But free exercise really is an outreach to the whole community, and witnessing each of our denominations, witnessing to our own faith, to people who come for help or to converse, no matter what faith they're coming from. And I think that's really where sometimes people would rather restrict our exercise to just worship or just conversations among ourselves. But what we're looking for is freedom to exercise our faith in the public square with everyone.
Actually, I think that points to, you mentioned how Pope John Paul had talked about dialogue. And actually, one of the things that I felt is also reflected in the film is that with all of the challenge or conflict or debate, one of the things I think that comes out of the film very well, and one of the things, again, I think is true, and one of the things that I think is the value of, the way religion has been treated by the First Amendment, is that no matter what faith you might choose to ascribe to, even that is ascribing to no faith, there are a set of values that kind of transcend the boundaries of each, whether it's each community, each house of worship, etc. And one of the beauties of America is America values those values, even as, right, to this moment, to this day, we are continuing to debate, who is correct, who has power, and who gets to speak. So I hope, one of my hopes is always, and one of the things I really liked about that film is that we can continue to pull out that sense of shared value, shared sense of humanity, no matter what doorway you might walk into.
And to push that a little bit further is what I call a kind of melting pot, because we find that you have many different traditions happening all at the same time. A person, because of technology or exposure to other, it allows me to, if I want to sit in Quaker meeting, it also allows me to overlay in meditation practices from the East. It allows me to perhaps be, in many ways, perhaps even challenged by my sense of devotion to prayer by my Islamic brothers and sisters, right? It allows me to take part in Carnival. It allows me to wear certain types of jewelry to jump on or jump off. And so just seeing how people are living, we say something in church, we'll say, people are tithing, but they're also playing the lottery. Because everybody, folks are looking for a miracle. People are looking for, answers. People are taking the pills and they're also doing CBD. I'm being real. Like so to see how we are challenged and have our hands and feet in different traditions. But I think with that becomes, how do we pay homage and understand how we appropriate? And so being from, recognizing in my Judeo-Christian value, I have a responsibility to not misappropriate the Jewish heritage of Jesus Christ. That's a personal, way in which I view this. But that's a real, because people are doing that,
Hi, thanks. I'm wondering if, we just saw this history both of what it looked like to respond to these incidents that happened, but also some really strong statements of what it looks like on the citizen level to stand with your neighbor who might be different from you. And I'm wondering if maybe you could all share a word about how that looks today in today's world. What does it look like to uphold that value of religious liberty as just a person who is living in this diverse society that we live in? What does that look like to uphold that, to stand with one another, to each of you today?
Yeah, I think what I was mentioning before about just that our faith compels us to be to serve every one of our neighbors, no matter what their own faith may be. I think one of the things that we're doing now is we have for many generations had welcome centers, right? You can still go to Upper Darby, and there's the Irish Center, which for all intents and purposes means Catholic center too, but and before that there were Italian settlement houses in South Philadelphia. There were religious communities founded to take care of each wave of immigrants, and I think we're still one of our ministries is a welcome center in Kensington, another in Center City when immigrants from the southern border are brought north and need to be settled temporarily, or permanently. We're not checking whether they're registered in their parish. We're not checking, what their own religion may be. We're kind of welcoming them as neighbors, as brothers and sisters, and people with no particular faith at all can do that too. But I think as people of faith, we're really compelled to do that. By divine command, of course, but also just by our sense of a common origin. The Book of Genesis says that we're made in the image and likeness of God, right? At the beginning, there's no second round of that, right? We're not. Some people are descended from human beings 1.0, and then others from are made in some other image or with some other set of rules for human nature. So I think. Both faith and conscience direct us to see that solidarity among human beings, and that's the paradox, right? That my faith compels me to see you as brother or sister, without wondering or needing to know if your faith sees the same about me, right? And I think that we build solidarity from within, and then we can build solidarity externally.
I would say also I think about the amount of time in history that many of our traditions, so being in a community, for example, in Ardmore, we've been there on that plot since 1895. Mother Bethel is the longest continuously owned parcel of land owned by African Americans in the United States. And so having that connection in community and thinking of, certainly for history, historical reasons what these spaces meant for those particular communities that built, but also how they have withstand and continuing to withstand the test of time. So the history, you can't get away from who and what you're created to be. And so Mother Bethel standing in the gap during the yellow fever here in Philadelphia. Well, in Ardmore here, we became, we've vaccinated 5,000 people over the past 4 years. So to see, and going into our sanctuary, and we're just, because it was just the biggest place that you on the right, if you're, if you've done, if you're waiting to be seen by the doctor. And then we get pictures of, parents who are not of African-American descent telling their children, go to the altar and pray. And we had no clue, or people just saying, I just wanted somewhere to be quiet. Wow, we're just here to give you, RSV, shingles, and a COVID shot, not knowing that there's a spiritual happening, right, in that space. And so being connected to space, the longevity in community, and being able to withstand the test of time, and that you can't pick us up and take us somewhere else. We're there, So I think that also speaks volumes, too.
Bill, I have to catch a train back to New York, but I just want to thank the panelists, thank everybody here. And I just want to say a word about the first director, Leo Eaton. He died in the home stretch of this film. And John Paulson came in and did a wonderful job finishing it. But it's also a great tribute to Leo and the work that he did. And I hope you enjoyed it and it stimulated some thought. So thank you.
Are there further questions? Yes. Yes.
I ask a lot of questions. I love history. May I ask a question? Thank you.
Just time for one more question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know if you can hear me. I don't think that's on anyway. Thank you. I just would like to know your views on where we are today in this country in terms of one practicing their individual faith in terms of their beliefs and infusing that into law. And the biggest issue in election season that we're talking about, for instance, is women's reproductive rights. And I just would like to know your views on where do you think the country is going in terms of, one, having their own personal beliefs and practicing that personally, and the law and that example. Thank you.
So one more question. I want to get the other question.
Yeah, so we also have one.
Is there one more? We'll collect the one more question and answer them together.
Hi, thanks. I'm an historian, but I'm going to try to ask a legal question. This is kind of directed more towards Professor Ewald. I'm just curious of your thoughts on, is there a danger today of religious freedom claims kind of overpowering the disestablishment part of the First Amendment? I think of the court case with the coach offering a prayer for students after the game. And there's kind of the question of, all right, is this the religious freedom of the coach? Is this the religious freedom of individuals to participate? Or is it a question about coercion of a coach kind of imposing and creating an unspoken rule that you should be a part of this prayer if you really want to be, in with the coach kind of a thing. So I'm just curious about what you think about the two trends, the two parts of the First Amendment.
Sorry, you want a quick answer?
I know, sorry.
No. So look, it's obvious.
Use the mic, Bill, if you don't mind.
Sorry, it's obviously a huge legal problem to figure out where you draw the line. And the coach would say, I'm exercising my religious liberty, and I have my football players gather in a circle and they pray on the field and everybody sees what's happening. And then the objection is, well, that's coercive to people who don't belong to your religious group. And the court has got the responsibility of figuring out how to draw the line. It's controversial the way that they've been drawing it in recent years, and we have to wait and see what they get up to. But I think the main point is it's really hard to draw those lines in ways that are going to satisfy everybody.
I think one thing I would say, maybe in response to both questions, is, in terms of the state of our country, I think one of the most difficult things to overcome is that most people look at most issues in terms of power, right? Who has the power to say this or that, to do this or that, to compel this or that? And it's very easy to interpret the speech of people who speak their conscience, which is part of free exercise, as a matter of power, as equating speech and violence, as in being in or out, being having a voice or not having a voice. And if we're looking at things always through that lens of who has power and how do they use it and who doesn't have power, it can really, like I said a few minutes ago, lead us to imputing motives on other people rather than asking them why you're saying what you're saying. I think if you ask most religious people, what the view that you're saying is maybe not so popular, maybe it offends me, maybe I vehemently disagree with you. Why are you saying that to me? The answer is going to be because I believe that it's a matter of deep importance. I think it's a matter that's essential to the dignity of the human person, that it's a matter of literally life and death, that it's a matter of, from a certain religious perspective, eternal life and death. If I really believe that and I keep quiet, if I think in my conscience that someone's going to hell and I don't say anything to them, what a monster I must be to just say, well, I don't care if you're lost forever, right? Now, maybe you don't think there's eternal life, maybe you don't believe in heaven and hell, but if I believe it and I keep quiet for the sake of not provoking an argument, then that's on me, right? And so I think if we can look at, not just religious dialogue, but discourse that we have about morality in terms of this person is taking a risk to say what they really believe because they care about my good, I'm going to try and listen to it from that perspective and not immediately think that it's a violent or thing or a misuse of power. Then I think we get to understand each other much better and maybe even come to some common ground on what we believe in terms of the good life and the moral life.
I will, excuse me, I will build on that. Maybe it's a restatement, but one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot the last couple of years is there's, in Judaism, there's something called machloket l'shem shamayim, which is basically debate for the sake of heaven. And what that means, or how that is, what that's interpreted as, is that debate is healthy, but that debate and conversation is healthy, and understanding is healthy, and disagreement is healthy, but for the sake of heaven, it is not for the sake, it is not to win, right? It is not to I am not a lawyer, right? It is not a legal arena, it's a human arena, and really what that's supposed to do is provoke empathy, right? It's not to provoke agreement. You may walk away fundamentally on different sides of an issue, but you have heard each other. And that, I think, dovetails well with what you've just said.
Good. Well, I think we are actually past the allotted time.